Okay, let's read from James chapter 1. I like this book, and I like the first chapter and these first verses here. Let's read verse 19, 20, and 21. No, just 19 and 20. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not or produces not the righteousness of God. Two good verses that say an awful lot. And they talk to me just as much as they talk to you. So the thought that I want to offer you this morning, we've already talked about swift to hear. Now this is going to point out, let every person be slow to speak. Ouch. Slow to speak. So what are you going to do with that? What am I going to do with that? I guess any of us would draw a conclusion and say a few things. But did you know that God in the scriptures have said, shut your face? Oh, come on now. Slow to speak. And nothing speaks it any better than the scriptures. And since there's so, hey, listen, since there's so much in the scriptures that are said about this, it must be a problem that people have. It must be that we humans do more talking than we should at times. So let's listen to some of those scriptures. I've put them here on a card. When we go back to the Proverbs, it says this in Proverbs 13:3, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life. Now what does that tell you? Oh my. Yeah. But he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. Now what does that tell you? My gracious. Life and destruction is involved with the mouth, just the two lips on the front of every one of us. Life and destruction. Here's another one in Proverbs, Proverbs 21:23. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. I don't know what all to say about that, but I imagine a lot of us have said that, boy, I shouldn't have said that. Or I wish they hadn't have said that. So whoso keepeth his tongue. Now that gives us an assignment. We've got our tongue naturally. And you notice the doctor looks at it about every time he wants to analyze anything. I wonder how often the great physician looks at our tongue and says, uh-oh. Yeah. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. Now believe me, we think it's necessary to say what we say, but after it's said, I don't know about that. Trouble? Then there's another verse in James 1:26. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, he deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. So you see from this verse, you can be ever so religious, but not bridle the tongue. And you who've been on the farm, you know what bridling is all about. You put a bridle in a horse's mouth and you can determine which way he goes. So a bridle on our tongue can certainly do a lot of determining. But if we do not bridle our tongue, there's trouble ahead, which says we can head off trouble. 1 Peter 3:10, for he that will love life and see good days. Wow, what a description. Love life? You want to see good days? Let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. Now I marked these verses down just because they had a whole lot to say. Looks to me like we need to bridle our tongue, help our tongue, do some homework about our tongue ahead of time, that this is what I'm not going to say and this is what I should say. Now this section of Bible here is talking about our tongue and our words in relationship to getting angry. That's when we say things that we shouldn't, for the most part. However, this is still true with a lot of things in life. What about slander? I mean, none of us, absolutely none of us, want anything negative said about us. So with that in mind, and the golden rule, shouldn't we be careful what we say about other people? Now I've had this experience, and so have you. And I know there's people that have said what they've said about me. But I've decided that whenever any of those are brought up in a conversation, and you analyze every situation and think about what it's all about. So whenever somebody like that is brought up in a conversation, I have a coined saying that I say. I say, those are good people. That's it. And let the conversation flow on from there. Now, if you don't plan to say a certain something ahead of time, you're liable to say the wrong thing when the heat of the battle comes. Isn't that right? Isn't that good sense? So think ahead of time of what you might say under certain circumstances. Now, if we've got certain things to say, if it's possible, if it do any good, it's best to say it right to the person. But so often that does not happen. There is slander out there. There is gossip out there that hurts others. Don't you think that it's just a good thing that you decide ahead of time that if there's something being said, you don't really try to remember to pass it on? Now you've got to do your own deciding and your own vocabulary construction. But just work it around to where you feel uncomfortable, which causes you to back off, when it comes to the point of being negative unless it somehow has a constructive aspect to it. You know what I'm talking about. There's tale-bearing. People just enjoy passing on and passing on and passing on tales that ought to die. Really ought to die. They don't do any good. They don't help anyone. And they don't help you either. And I always like to add in a subject like this, the things that we can infer. That we don't exactly say the bad things, but we can leave an impression of inference, which I try to stay away from. If it isn't constructive, then put up a red flag. So some of the things that are said beyond the anger verbiage are things that should never happen, because it goes far and wide and it can be very hurtful. Can I illustrate that a little bit here? You won't like this, but just hang on. You know, there's something between 5 and 6 billion rats that inhabit the earth. Almost one rat for every person. Thus, there are more rats likely out there than there are humans. But, listen to this. With favorable conditions and no death, 2 rats can produce 359 million descendants in 3 years. What do you think gossip does as it spreads? Things that shouldn't be said. Have you ever had it done on you? Well, it's tempting to retaliate, but everyone has had the wrong things said about them. So what are we going to do about it? I guess be slow to speak. Now, in contrast to the rats, let me give you this. Edison's, this is Edison's talking machine. He invented it, you know. And once when this man was introducing Thomas Edison at a dinner time, the toastmaster mentioned his many inventions, and he talked at long length about his talking machine. The aged inventor then rose to his feet, smiled, and gently addressed the audience and said, "I thank the gentleman for his kind remarks, but I must insist on a correction." He said God invented the first talking machine. You know what he means? God invented the first talking machine. I only invented the first one that can be shut off, turned off. I kind of like that one. Yeah. But what had, in the early days, what had any more attention for gossip than the country telephone line? Yeah. So we don't enter into these things as best as possible, and we learn as time goes on to do a better job, especially in our families, especially at church. I've been in situations where just too much talking went on in the background at church. But we get together, people talk, and then the tale-bearing starts, and we fill our day or evenings or whatever with some kind of entertainment at the expense of someone. We should tell ourselves no, no. Absolutely. We do not involve ourselves in these kind of things unless we can diffuse it, help it a little bit. So what have we learned with the passing of time and the years that we've lived? There's a few of these things that I've learned. One thing I've learned, don't make it easy for the next person to speak improperly. By that I mean, don't open up your life to whatever people say so that they can feel a comfort to come to you and talk about too much of things that shouldn't be talked about. Know what I mean? Don't let your front yard be a garbage dump. Don't let people feel comfortable. We've been around those kind of people. And we could probably all talk about it to a certain degree. But just don't make it easy for people to come around and spill their garbage. Here's the second thing I've learned. Make sure you have all the facts. You know, a lot can be said by just hearing a few things and you're off and running. No, don't do that. Make sure you have all the facts, and once you learn all the facts, you will likely be glad that you didn't say something. Because some people who like to pass on the tales will always dress the tale in their kind of vocabulary and way of thought, and that might be a distortion plus. You know what I'm talking about. Slow to speak. So be sure of your facts. And here's another thing I've learned, and that is to understand what the Bible means when it says, blessed are the merciful. You know what I'm afraid of? That if I don't show the right kind of spirit, that kind of spirit may boomerang and come back and sit on my front porch. We've heard the statement, what goes around comes around. And I don't know how all that works out, but I would think that it's best not to say some things, because listen, lest you be quoted. There's the big thing. You say something to someone, and they hear it, and they say they won't say anything, they won't pass it on, but there very well may be a time they get upset with you, and they do pass it on. Now, is that a part of the Proverbs that we talked about on wisdom?